Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. We started August. I want to do a quick recap of July 2021 and talk about where the longer-range forecast models performed well and didn't perform well. So you're looking at a map that shows you the July 2021 total precipitation ranks by climate district. You can tell that from parts of Texas through New York, there's been a strip into here that saw some very heavy rainfall throughout the month. But there are some drier pockets we need to take note of, like in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia and West Virginia. This region here, coming out of parts of Nebraska through Colorado, Kansas, even dipping into Oklahoma, was dry. The northern plains in the upper Midwest, centered on the Red River Valley of the North, despite having at times some storms, we still sit near record dryness in that area. The Pacific Northwest on the whole was very dry, largely due to big ridges that sat in that area. But I will point out one thing. The southwestern monsoon has really been cranking this year. And you can see pockets in Arizona here having a top 5, top 10 wettest Julys on record. Now, did the models forecast that? They did not. Let's start there, actually. You can see that in that part of Arizona, the models had things dry. And there weren't much in the way of hints telling us way back at the beginning of July that we were going to see such a strong monsoonal setup. You can also see the overprediction of the rainfall here, which we just highlighted, and the models really tried to bring that moisture pretty far to the north. And we know that it didn't extend into this part of southern Wisconsin, parts of Iowa, and southern Minnesota. This was models were over-promising rainfall in that area. So I just think it's always healthy to go back and see how well the model's been performing, because at the end of this video, I'm going to show you the new updates for mid-August to mid-September. We're going to just remember that the skill scores of these models are about 60%. In other words, on a 1-month time scale, they tend to get the sign of the anomaly right about 60% of the time. And honestly, that's a marvel of modern science. We're capable of doing that. But showing you how dry the Pacific Northwest and the West are, I wanted to take you here to the latest updates for the reservoirs in California. A couple of the big ones in the northern part of the state, like Lake Shasta and Lake Oroville here, they're both sitting at below, well below normal levels. Lake Oroville at 25%, Lake Shasta at 32% of full pool. Feel free to pause the video and take a closer look at this. And then I went up and looked at, in fact, let me just go back so you can see this. If you use the hydromet data for the teacup diagrams that they produce for the reservoirs in the Northwest, I was looking at the Yakima River Basin data. And what I like about these is it kind of shows you based on like a teacup. See how it looks like a teacup there, how what percent they are full of water. So looking at some of the bigger reservoirs, there are some that are, less than ideal here, sitting at, well, this one's at 58% of one of the larger reservoirs there. So check these resources out. I find them to be quite valuable. Let's flip over to our temperature discussion now. You're looking at July temperature ranks. And again, we see many climate reporting districts in the West setting all-time records, while the southern plains through the southeast, in fact, the heart of the Corn Belt into the northeast, at times throughout July were near normal to cooler than normal in terms of the temperature pattern. Did the model see that? Overall, we'd have to answer that yes. You can tell how warm it was forecasting July to be in the West. It did pick up on the cooler pattern that extended from the southern plains through the southeast. It was a bit too warm in parts of the northeast as well as parts of the Midwest in here. But overall, using just the pattern as an indicator, I'd say the models have been doing a better job with temperature than they had overall with the precipitation. So with that, let's now look at a couple other variables. Next one, let's go to soil moisture. This is what the soil moisture at 16 inches in percent here look like on July the 1st. And what I want to do is I want to fast forward this over the month to see where our soil moisture values improved or they got worse by looking at the August 2nd data, which is right here. And a couple of those big areas we pointed out come to mind, and that is looking through the Appalachian Mountains into parts of the Ohio River Valley, pockets here in the Carolinas, also right into here in Kentucky. Then you see the bigger areas we highlighted a few moments ago showing up with those drier soils, drier now than they were at the beginning of the month. The southwestern monsoon being under-predicted, we see a lot of very wet conditions there. And so it's just a good illustration of how the month of July has evolved. From here, let's take a look at the last 7 days. And at the end of last week, we did see the models do a fantastic job forecasting the rainfall from this system right in through here. That was at the end of last week through the weekend, and we brought some needed rains through parts of South Dakota, western Iowa, southern Iowa, northern Missouri, into southern Illinois, south central and western Illinois. And then remember, we talked about this last time, the severe weather that came out of Wisconsin before that, bringing the needed rain into southern Wisconsin. But outside of those two areas, you do see that it has been a very stormy last week across much of the United States. A lot of isolated convection, isolated thunderstorm complexes. And we're going to continue to see that as we progress forward in this forecast. So we'll notice if we watch this animation just here over the last 24 hours or so of rainfall here on radar, we start to see the frontal boundary pushing to the south, so a lot of scattered convection today. But as I go back to yesterday again, you can still see into the overnight hours how the storms faded here. But as we work our way toward this afternoon here on Monday, there they pop again, some locally very heavy rainfall. And we've got flash flood watches out for a lot of that area. In addition to that, a lot of lightning going on, active here at the end of the day on Monday. I'm recording this at about 4:30 in the afternoon here, Central Time. And you can see with the frontal boundary combined with the sea breeze producing a lot of storms from Texas all the way through southern Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and getting into Florida. But look at the convection here, popping those storms going over the mountains in the west as well. So a great resource there, blitzertongue.org. Okay, what I want to show you next is where this pattern is going, because I think it's going to be moving a lot in the coming days and weeks. In other words, I wouldn't get too settled into one pattern, and it's going to start with a shift in what we call the Pacific North American pattern. Now, in a nutshell, just simple terms, when the PNA is positive above the zero line, we have more ridges along the west coast. And when it drops off and goes negative, we tend to have more troughs. Now, throughout much of June into July, the PNA was either near normal or it was above average, and it really shot up here at the end of the month of July and is going after a peak right now at the beginning of August. But as you can see in the forecast, it is projected to come back down. Now, that peak is actually seen by looking at the jet stream level flow today. Now, take a look at this, okay? We have this piece of the jet stream here going up north of Alaska and then cascading into this broader trough that's over the east. We have a cutoff low here and an elongated trough there, and a secondary, more southern branch of the jet stream doing this. Now, why I'm illustrating these points is that this is the dip in the jet stream over the east that's got everything cool at the surface. In fact, it's dipping in the jet stream because it is cool at the surface. And the ridge is running back up the west, and this is part of that big change in the PNA pattern. Now, normally, if you'd have just handed me this map and said, what do you think is going to happen? Well, I would say these two features here don't seem to be a part of the faster flow running over the ridge. And I think they're going to get stuck. And I'll be honest, I would be wrong because the models are attempting to pull that out of there. Now, we can see that by looking at the forecast of the Pacific North American pattern. Coming off here at 4 standard deviations above normal, and then diving down by the time we get to this upcoming weekend into negative territory. That means troughs will be coming into the northwest. And if they come into the northwest, they progress through the Canadian Prairie and they progress through the upper Midwest. And that is the most significant model trend we saw over the weekend, and it's continued now through the 12Z runs on Monday. So let me show it to you. Now, here's a static map of those winds. So you see there's that northern branch of the jet stream. There's the deeper trough over the east. And here are the two lows we just discussed. There's the closed one, and there's the open wave to the south. Now, as we go from Monday, in fact, let's blow this up. There we go. We go from Monday into Tuesday. You can see that the flow even attempts to block up with a high over low. But these two troughs, this one here and here, seem to work together. And what happens is the southern wave, by the time we get to Friday, gets kicked through parts of like Nevada toward Idaho. And it's on the flow coming around the backside of this cutoff low that it advances. Behind it, we're pushing it with winds coming out of the North Pacific. See that? And it's going to force both of these waves this weekend to move through. The first one, take a look, by Saturday morning sits here, and the low behind it sits there. Now, why I'm talking about this so much is that this is going to give us an excellent multi-round event of rising motion. And that all translates into storms into this area for this weekend and possibly into next week as well, because that pattern continues. Look at that, another trough digging into the Pacific Northwest, and early next week, that one is going to kick across Montana here into the northern plains and Canadian Prairie. So that gets us all the way out to Tuesday the 10th. And now what I want to do is I want to show you the end results of this. First, let's get through this next week. Front sags to the south, heavy rains along the Gulf Coast. We saw them already today. We're going to watch a low develop in through this area and take on off to the north and east. So in the Carolinas, from west to east, we're going to be seeing a major precipitation gradient, very wet conditions there, and that also extends into parts of Virginia. For most of the midsection of the country, it's a drier week with cooler weather and higher pressure. But you now start to see better chances of storms showing up here, and all of that is coming at the end of this week, all right? What you see in through this area, that's coming today. Now, that's our bigger picture. Let's go talk about the individual model runs here and take a look at the total precip added up all together. So Monday, let's go through Monday and get out to Tuesday morning. There we go. So frontal boundaries in place here, higher pressure to the north, and we're just going to see through the beginning of this week a lot of storms firing up in this particular vicinity. Could also see them still right here on the front range of the Rockies as well. Now we're only at Tuesday. Let's get out to Wednesday morning, afternoon, and evening. There is a weak front that stretches right through this part of the Canadian Prairie, but outside of that, not a lot of precip to be seen here through middle of the week across the midsection of the country. Maybe some scattered storms coming off the high plains, but other than that, there's our low developing over the Carolinas by Wednesday. Now where does it go? By Thursday, it develops up the coast and moves off the coast. And we do get this chance of getting some scattered storms in the midsection of the country, possibly cutting through Iowa. But this is where the bigger show gets going, the one I've been illustrating for you. And here it is. The lead wave comes out late Friday night into Saturday morning. And now you can see that'll initiate those storms. In fact, lower pressure follows that. See it right here? That's round one, and that pushes through the Red River Valley of the North, hits those dry fields in Minnesota, North Dakota, and then southern Saskatchewan and Manitoba. The second wave follows it, and it's right there, and the two work in concert to produce, possibly by next Saturday night through Sunday morning, a frontal boundary that then moves through Minnesota toward Wisconsin, possibly clipping the upper Midwest and the mid and upper Mississippi River Valley. And that goes on through. And here we are looking, by the time we get to next Monday, is having a pretty significant system roll through the Canadian Prairie in the upper Midwest, followed by another one right here into early next week. So that's kind of the detailed package of what we just discussed. And we can look at this again one other way. European model 12Z run, next 7 days of precipitation anomalies. So we are drier in through this corridor. Better chances of storms in through here, right? And those waves as they come in initiate onshore flow here, bring storms into the mountains, and then really get energized to produce some severe weather possibly in through that area. Other than that, it's just a stalled out frontal boundary here. And I know I've only shown you the ECMWF, but the GFS, let's just click over to it. Honestly, it has a very similar pattern. The only difference is the GFS doesn't quite bring in the same level of precipitation here to the south, and it doesn't quite have that first wave coming through Iowa as well resolved, and that's why it's in the GFS we see drier. But those are some subtleties we'll just have to wait to see evolve throughout the week. Now, this pattern from that point forward continues to show an evolution where it stays open and moving. And to get our minds wrapped around that, let me just show you, first of all, what is the probability of getting an inch of rain from now through the next 10 days, which takes us all the way out to next Thursday morning. And so when you look at this here, we do see better chances of rain through the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa. We see better chances of rain through pockets of the Canadian Prairie. In fact, this is some of the best chances I've seen in those areas in a very long time. All right. So where does the pattern go? Well, this is by the end of this upcoming week. So this takes us out to next Sunday night, going through next Monday into Tuesday and Wednesday. What we end up getting is the pattern favoring a ridge rebuilding here in the Gulf of Alaska, the flow coming around in a broader trough that then exits over some sort of a ridge on the East Coast. But if you keep a trough in place in through here, the models are going to see that as a general area of ascent. And as a result, you can tell that the week 2 precipitation pattern, that's what we're looking at here, where that trough axis comes through, it's got a lot of rising motion out ahead of it, and it's calling for scattered thunderstorm development. And therefore, there's better chances of being wet in through this area with those scattered storms. But it's just like we saw in July. When I say scattered, I don't mean large complexes of wet weather moving through, that's stuff that's reserved for fall, winter, and spring. We're in summer, this scattered convection. So take in this map and see how this pattern is going to evolve here. I think it's the best view of what the week 2 pattern is going to look like. Now from there, I would like to go straight into a discussion about some temperatures, but first, we do have quite a bit of air quality issues going on in the upper Midwest along the Front Range, and interestingly enough, tucked right behind it, this is all flood watch in through this area. Excessive heat watches are out for the Columbia Basin as the ridge initially builds there this week. And those air quality issues are probably best seen by just looking at the last few frames of our satellite animation today. So you can see the smoke in the sky coming from those fires in California, spreading through the Pacific Northwest, but then diving down into the deeper trough across the east. And there is some scattered cloudiness in through here, but the biggest storms line from Texas over to parts of southern Georgia and right here along the coast of the Carolinas today, at least outside of the convection in the southwestern monsoon. So just to show you where the smoke is going, this is a forecast over the next couple of days here. And you can really see that flow pattern with that positive PNA. Now, you can see the positive PNA flow, ridge into a trough right here in our smoke and how it's getting transported around the country. Okay, watch this temperature though. Monday's highs going into Tuesday. Cooler across a broad sector here in the United States while the heat returns to the northern plains and upper Midwest. Why do we have those heat advisories? 101 Yakima, 95 in Spokane. As we go into Wednesday, the heat continues to open up into the northern plains of the United States, but it's going to take much of this week to get the warmer weather back in to the central United States on Thursday and push out the cooler weather that's over the south until Friday and Saturday. Now, look at the pattern shift. As the PNA goes negative and the troughs come in, cooler here. The warmth is under the ridge that's moving to the east. What a beautiful example of how the atmosphere can transition from one pattern to the next. And how long does it hang around for? Well, this would be the day 5 through 10 temperature pattern. And now we see the cooler weather in place here. It will come out of the northwest first. And as that ridge opens back up, well, all these places that are this week cooler than normal are going to go into next week with a warm bias, somewhere between 5 and 10 degrees above average. And then that goes out, takes us all the way out until day 15. And the models are rebuilding a ridge once again in the west, as you saw, and they're dipping that trough in through this area, which means the pattern is open and it is moving. Now, the question or the concern I have going forward is it going to continue to do that? Because we saw throughout July the total atmospheric angular momentum build up, and then it fell back down over the last 10 days or so. But a lot of that decrease has been down here in the southern hemisphere or just north of the equator. Or excuse me, a lot of that increase was just south of, a lot of that increase was in the southern hemisphere and over the equator. The decreases are what I'm concerned about, and that's this area right in through here. We've started to see a northward progression of our lower momentum state. And if that gets pretty far to the north, I'll be concerned over whether or not that turns into a more blocking pattern for the Pacific. I don't have much detail other than that right now because at the same time we're watching that, we've seen some easterly wind bursts here indicating stronger trades and some upwelling, hence the cooler water beginning to show up. We've seen the North Atlantic warm up, but not nearly to the extent of this pocket of the Pacific. We have temperatures here that are 6 to 8 degrees Celsius above average. That is 10 to about 12 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. I don't know that I've ever seen a region this large that's so hot. And my problem with that is I don't know what that is eventually going to do to the overall trough ridge setup across the Pacific. My concern comes back to this. Does that eventually rob it of some momentum and block it up? That's what I'm going to have to try to figure out. Because while all that's going on, the MJO is right now over in phase 8, moving into phase 1 and 2, and will likely progress over to phases 3 and 4. Where is that? We're over Africa, moving back to the Indian Ocean, and then eventually over Australia. But it might take 25 days to get all the way back into phase 4 or phase 5. And that's going to have a big influence on the tropical season we're about to get into here in the month of August. National Hurricane Center's afternoon outlook, they finally included this area as up to a 20% chance of developing into a tropical disturbance or depression here in the coming days. And with really good ascent in this area, it's not as though there's any suppression of the vertical motion there in the near term. We're also going to be watching the East Pacific for tropical cyclones. And just to keep an eye on this, right now, most of these are projected to stay out over the Pacific Ocean, but we do know sometimes they can curl up here and reintroduce moisture into the southwest. I'm not seeing that at this point, but a lot of suppression of Australia and Indonesia with this pattern as it's setting up. So tropical systems developing, well, the ECMWF has given a large region coming off of Africa by the end of this week a better than 50% chance at seeing some development. I want to tell you something. Throughout August, we need to keep an eye on this area. Wind shear is low, ocean temperatures are warm, but we could start seeing some more homegrown systems coming out of the Gulf of Mexico as well. And even though the models aren't showing it right now, there are a few bigger indicators, especially if the Indian Ocean is where the MJO sits, that we could get better tropical activity here. So I'll keep an eye on that, report it back to you. But as I said at the beginning, I did that review of the models so that I could talk to you about where they're going. So let's get out there and look at week 3 from the European model. We're going to do temperatures first. Now what's interesting is the European model has really tried to keep much of this point east very warm throughout this whole summer, and at times it has not been. It's probably done the best with keeping the west warm. But the latest updates here, as we look out there to that week 3 time period, which is the 16th of August through the 23rd, this is not as warm as it has been compared to normal. And you start to see some hints at some cooler air coming in from this direction. Now, I want to complement this with the latest updates from the CFSV2, same time period, 16th through the 22nd. And the CFSV2 has got this whole region in the center of North America favored cool. Now, it's really bounced around a lot over the last few days, but this would be a pretty significant week 3 pattern shift overall. And that particular pattern shift, we need to see what it means in terms of precipitation, because the European model continues with open Gulf and a lot of thunderstorm activity through a broad sector here of the United States. See that? And with all the moisture coming in here, it's got me thinking we're going to be watching for those tropical cyclones to really get cranking by the middle and end of this month. But there's certainly, if I just take those drawings off there, you certainly don't see right now that the European model through the 23rd of August is trying to put in very dry conditions across the country. And does the CFSV2 agree? Well, to be honest, for the most part, it does. That's that same time period. These greens represent wetter than normal conditions. Now, it's got a little bit of a drier pocket in through here, but that just showed up in the latest run, and it might kind of flip-flop back and forth there. So I'll be watching that atmospheric momentum and the MJO transition to help us understand if we're going to see the Pacific jet stream get blocked up. And again, I think the biggest wild card, let me come back to it here. Was it right there? Sorry. The biggest wild card is this heat in place coming off of China, Japan, into the North Pacific. That could really upset the pattern moving forward. I'll watch it, keep an eye on it. Also, this developing La Nina, and I'll just report back to you, okay? Thank you so much. I'll talk to you again on Thursday.